Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Gerber, publisher of Terra Nova Books. I'm honored to welcome you to our January live on Zoom book reading featuring the Embudo Virus, Richard Heady's first novel. Richard was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and lived there through high school, with the exception of a year in Manila, the Philippines, and half a year in Honolulu during sabbatical leaves of his professor father. He attended Kalamazoo College and Western Michigan University and graduated with a major in philosophy and a minor in English literature. For the next 10 years in several cities, he worked the kind of jobs his degree opened up for him: bookstore clerk, line worker in an auto assembly plant, cab driver, teacher's aide in an elementary school, dishwasher, garbage man, psychiatric hospital aide, truck loader in a grocery warehouse, emergency communications worker at Red Cross branch. Between jobs, he traveled throughout the US, Mexico, and Europe. While living for a dozen years in Philadelphia, he earned a graduate degree in computer science from Temple University, which led to work in pattern recognition, image processing, machine learning, and database management for biomedical research, work he left behind after 20 years to write fiction. His short stories have appeared in Carve magazine, The Best of Carve magazine, and Athlon. Since 1987, Albuquerque, New Mexico has been his home. Now please sit back and enjoy. Here's Richard.
Many thanks to all of you who have zoomed in tonight for this event. I'm grateful for both your interest and your support. I'm going to begin by talking some about how this book developed in an attempt to answer the question that one early reader asked me, which was, what made you decide to write about that? Well, when I began writing this novel, although I knew some of the things I wanted to be in it, I didn't have a clear idea at all about what its story would be. In previous years, I'd written a lot of folktale. I'd read a bunch of folktales and myths from all over the world and books about them. And I felt that somehow that reading would come out in what I wrote. I also had a vague sense of 2 or 3 characters who I thought would be at the center of whatever the story was. So to begin, I wrote a lot of notes to myself. And during that time, I happened to read an article in the Albuquerque Journal that gave me a direction. It was a short profile of the author, environmentalist, and buffalo rancher, Dan O'Brien, who lives in South Dakota, but who had recently been in Albuquerque to teach a workshop at UNM, which I'd taken, as had Paul Bogart, the author of the Journal article. The article is mainly about Dan's love of falconry, and toward the end, it mentioned efforts to protect peregrine falcons from habitat loss caused by human encroachment, efforts about which Dan was not optimistic. Until we get a handle on our human population, he said, we're just putting out brush fires. We have too many people now, and there's no real plan that I can see to seriously deal with the problem. I wish that some of our better minds would stop worrying about .com companies and start worrying about things that are important. Well, I hadn't been working for a .com, but I had worked with computers for 20 years. And that random quote struck a chord with me. So I started thinking how I might make the problem of human population part of my novel. And pretty soon, because I'd worked for years as at a biomedical research institute, the idea formed of an institute devoted to studying human population and of a scientist who worked there creating computer models. So I read about computer modeling and researched human population. I think most of us know our numbers have spiked over the last century, but even so, the actual statistics are pretty sobering. In terms of raw numbers, we reached 1 billion people for the first time in the early 1800s. And then it took over 120 years to double that, 2 billion, around 1927. The next doubling to 4 billion in 1975 took less than 50 years. And the next doubling, an additional 4 billion that brought us to our current 8 billion or so, also took less than 50 years. The birth rate has declined since those decades of explosive growth. So our numbers aren't doubling as fast as they were then. But because there are so many of us now, even with a lower birth rate, we're still adding 82 million people a year. And the UN projects there will be 9 billion of us in 2038, 10 billion in 2056, and 11 billion in 2088. But the numbers aren't the only way to represent the situation. A few years ago, I was at the Natural History Museum in New York City and happened to see a display I've since found online. If you're interested in seeing it, it's at a site called thesoundingline.com. A large screen in the museum displayed a map of the world with the oceans in dark blue and the land masses in green, and ran a 4-minute video over and over. Along the bottom of the screen, there was a timeline that ran from 0 to 2000 AD. And just above it, a line graph showed the world population for each year as it ticked by. On the map, each million people had their location represented by small yellow dots. So at the beginning, there were clusters of dots in India and China and around the Mediterranean, and just a scattering around the rest of the globe, representing a total world population of only 170 million people. As the video ran, and a marker moved along the timeline at a rate of about 100 years every 10 seconds, yellow dots would light up as population grew. For all but the last 30 seconds of the video, dots are added really slowly. The world population doesn't double from 170 million until 1200, and doesn't double again until the 1700s. Then in 1800, the rate at which the dots are added increases noticeably. 10 seconds later, at 1900, it increases again. And then the amazing thing about this video is that in the final 7 or 8 seconds of it, new dots appear so fast that to the eye, they just seem like a sudden blooming of yellow over every populated region of the planet. And that day, I just stood there in the museum and watched that video 3 straight times, letting that image sink in. Now, that kind of population surge in just a couple of 100 years is unprecedented for a species our size. And we aren't just any large species. Our activities change the atmosphere and climate, drive other species to extinction, pollute the oceans and the creatures that live in them with plastics, and seem to have us inevitably headed for crisis and some kind of collapse. There are, I learned, known conditions that cause birth rates and even population levels to decline, as they already have in some countries. These include higher living standards, easy access to contraceptives, education and empowerment of women, and a reliable level of security in old age that doesn't depend on having multiple children. The problem, of course, is there's no plan to make those conditions widespread enough to reduce our numbers, or even agreement there needs to be a plan. Eventually, however, I read an article called Negative Population Growth, Why We Must and How We Could Achieve It. It was published in 1996 in Population Environment by John B. Hall, who is a microbiologist at the University of Hawaii. That was my first exposure to the idea of immunocontraception. That is a biologically engineered virus that arouses an immune response in a target species against its own reproductive tissues, making it less likely or even unable to reproduce. Hall said the ability to create such a contraceptive virus for humans already existed, and argued that employing one would be better than enduring the consequences of continued unrestrained growth. Well, for a few minutes I thought, well, there we are. That's the solution. But it didn't take long to see there were some pretty serious ethical, not to mention practical problems with it. And then it took only a little longer to realize I had a central tension for my story. A conflicted scientist working at a population institute where they were investigating, supposedly as a contingency, the potential use of a contraceptive virus. So then I started reading about contraceptive viruses. I discovered that in Australia, scientists that actually experimented with them as a means of controlling non-native species such as rabbits and mice. But they hadn't actually released any into the wild. Before long, I began thinking that using biological science in that way would be almost like casting a magic spell on a species. And then, based on that thought, I saw how folktales and mythology were going to enter my story. Now, as it turns out, bringing out a book with the word virus in the title in the middle of this pandemic complicates the task. I'd had a different title, one-word title while writing the book, but in December of 2019, I had lunch with Marty Gerber, Scott's father, and also the editor at Terra Nova, a meeting he suggested we needed to have before entering into what he called the sometimes complex editing relationship. And one of the things Marty told me that day was, you need a different title. The one you have is enigmatic, and that's not good. So later that day, I came up with the Embudo Virus, which we both liked because the word virus caught your attention. It was literally what the story was about, and it also worked metaphorically for the way deceit and trickery spreads through the characters in the book. So a couple months later, in February, Marty sent me the cover they designed with a test tube superimposed on a colorful photo of the Sandia Mountains, and we both liked it. Then came March. First, we became aware of COVID, and then all of our lives were changed by it. Early in March, a few people commented the title was really timely. But then by the end of the month, people were asking if I thought putting out a book with virus in the title might make people avoid it. I began to worry it might and wrote Marty asking if he thought we should change the title. Well, Marty reassured me, said he'd done a small survey among people he knew and that most took the view, which he agreed with, that the title was more likely to increase than diminish interest. My call, he said. So I said, yeah, I'm probably overreacting. Since you don't think it's a problem, let's not worry about it. In April, I heard from Marty again. Some of his writers had decided they didn't want to launch a book during the pandemic's restrictions. And he asked if I wanted to delay publication too. It was my call, he said, but he thought it was better to go ahead. So I said, yeah, let's go ahead. The next couple of months, we finished editing the book and everything was moving along. Then in mid-June, I got another email. We've decided here at Terra Nova, it said, that publishing a book with virus in the title would be equivalent to injecting ourselves with hydrochloric, or whatever that stuff is, hydrochloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, that's it. Well, I wrote back, this is interesting, what changed your mind? The sheer magnitude of the plague, he said, the mind-boggling extent to which the world's politicians have compounded the problem, the shroud of negativity that's developed around the word virus because of the continuing toll. So I queried people again and got mixed reactions again. Opinion was about equally divided. And I wrote back saying, it seemed to me we lacked enough evidence to really know. The virus is still, title is still the best. We still like the cover. Let's go with it. In other words, I said pretty much what Marty had said to me back in March. So in the end, that's what we decided to do. It's just another way that this virus, even if you don't get it, messes with your mind. So I'm going to finish up in a minute by reading some of the book. But first I want to say a few words about the content and the structure of the book, because everything I've said tonight and pretty much all of the publicity and even what I'm about to read are all about the science and virus side of the story. That part of the narrative is told by the computer scientist, Rob. Roughly half of the chapters in the book, though, are told from the viewpoint of Rob's wife, Lena, who is a middle school teacher. In Lena's chapters, we learn about her current grief over the recent death of her father, which is complicated by an affair her father had years ago, and a period in her youth when, with an ex-boyfriend, she was part of a group growing and selling psilocybin mushrooms. We also learn about her struggles with infertility and eventually her marital problems. So her story is also a large part of the book. It's just not a part that is easily included on a back cover or in the other short descriptions of the book. So here's how the Embudo virus begins. How can Rob, a man of science, know what she is when he first sees her? He's at a table in the lunchroom, drinking coffee with Sarah, his research assistant, on Monday morning. We're discussing Sarah's schedule for the week, and just as he notices that Sarah's face is already fuller and only her 3rd month of pregnancy, over her shoulder, down the hallway at the far end of the room, a movement catches his eye. He recognizes Bellman immediately, but not his companion. She's thin, about the height of Bellman's shoulder, and dressed entirely in black. A long black skirt, black boots nearly hidden by the skirt, and a black jacket buttoned to her throat. They enter the lunchroom and turn towards the stairs in the opposite corner. Bellman gestures, lifting his palm upward, and she laughs. Neither of them looks in Rob's direction, but he can tell from her face that she knows he's watching. Sarah turns to see what attracted his attention. That's the new statistician, she says, Bellman squiring her around. An hour later, weary after last night's late flight back from his father-in-law's funeral, Rob stares out his 3rd floor office window and notices that the trees are leafing out. A green mist now fills in the grid of streets, and miles away, beyond the cluster of tall downtown buildings, a thicker mist traces the Rio Grande. His gaze drifts westward to the black line of the lava escarpment, topped by its 5 cinder cones, and then to snow-capped Mount Taylor on the horizon. He hears conversation in the lab, between his office and the hallway, and recognizes Bellman's voice. When he goes out, Bellman and the statistician are with Sarah at her workstation. The room hums with computer noise. Lists and diagrams cover a long whiteboard, and metal shelves are crammed with manuals, journals, and books. Bellman, clearly in a jovial mood, turns from Sarah toward Rob. His suit is a brown pinstripe and his tie is red. His shaved head shines under the fluorescent lights, and he gestures toward his companion as if introducing an act on stage. Rob, he says, this is Dr. Melinda Lanier. Melinda, Dr. Rob Clarke. The 2 of you will be working closely together. Her eyes are large and dark, almost as dark as her straight black hair, and her hand is cool when he shakes it. She gives him a brief, quizzical smile, which he's not sure how to take, and with the other hand, brushes some hair behind her ear. Their schedules don't bring them together again until Friday afternoon, when they ride out to BSF with Rick Dervick and Jerry Foster to attend a lecture for the Virus Project. At 2:30, the 4 of them cross the Institute parking lot. And when they reach Rick's hybrid SUV, Jerry offers the front seat to Melinda. She declines, saying Jerry needs the legroom more. And Jerry, apparently deciding the same logic applies to Rob, gets in. As Rick pulls out of the lot, Jerry turns, putting his prominent forehead and fringe of beard into profile against the windshield, and asks Melinda how she likes her new office. Melinda tells him she's quite happy with it, to which Jerry nods and turns to face forward again, having either fulfilled his need or exhausted his capacity for small talk. On the left, Rick's tan dome is fringed by graying hair pulled back into a ponytail. On the right, Jerry's head nearly touches the roof, and Rob notices that his much shorter hair is also thinning noticeably at the crown. They ride west on Central Avenue, past the dealer lots of recreational vehicles and mobile homes, and turn south. At Kirtland Air Force Base, a guardhouse stands in the middle of the road, and chain link fence topped by barbed wire stretches to both sides. The guard checks Rick's pass and waves them through. I'm still not used to all the security, Rick says. You'll get there, Jerry tells him. They drive past the brick buildings of the research labs, then take a 2-lane road into an expanse of eroding sand and dry arroyos, dotted by cactus and tufts of grass. As they pass 2 huge wooden structures several hundred feet off the road, Melinda looks questioningly at Rob. One is open scaffolding that arches higher at one end. The other is circular, with cables running from its rim down to a point in its center, like a giant carousel with an inverted top. Electromagnetic pulse generators, Rob says. They use them to test hardened equipment. The empty desert falls away to the Rio Grande on the right. To the left, the Manzano Mountains rise steeply. A few buildings surrounded by large patches of grass come into view between the road and the mountains. A golf course, Melinda asks, and Rob nods. A bunker flashes by. Concrete walls and a steel door built into a hump of earth, and Rick turns left. The road climbs into a wide canyon for a couple of miles, then ends at a Y-shaped cluster of 6 white buildings. Closed passageways connect the buildings, and the ones at the top of the Y are built right into the mountain. They park in a concrete lot. The car doors slam, the foothills loom over them, and they follow a walkway to the building at the base of the Y. A metal sign by its entrance says, Biological Security Facility. The receptionist buzzes them in and enters their names in a black binder. She calls to tell their escort, Frank Delante, that they've arrived and goes back to her typing. Behind her, behind a wall of thick glass, a security guard talks on the phone. Delante appears through the inner metal doors. He's a slight man with wavy dark hair, glasses, and a perpetually sour expression. Jerry introduces Melinda, and Delante leads him down a long hallway. They pass an auditorium on the left and a cafeteria on the right, then enter a large windowless conference room where tables arranged in a U face a large display screen on the wall. Jerry and Delante stand in the back of the room talking. Rick takes a chair halfway to the front of the room, and Melinda and Rob sit to either side of him. Over the next 10 minutes, a dozen or more BSF researchers show up, as do Floyd Benning and Neil Sanders, 2 more Embudo scientists. Then Bill Manning, the head of BSF, appears at the door with Bellman. Bellman stays in the back, leaning against the wall, and Manning walks to the front. He welcomes them to this, their 3rd project colloquium. Today, he says, Anna Dahlner will report on her recent trip to Canberra and their latest work there on viral control of animal populations. Like everyone at BSF, Anna wears a white lab coat with her name stitched over her heart. She wears rimless glasses and has straight brown hair chopped off uniformly at chin length. Rob has heard she's temperamental and difficult to work with, but an excellent immunogeneticist. She's also, he discovers, a no-nonsense lecturer. Instead of starting them off with a story about her trip down under, she plunges right in. Anna touches first on the initial use of viral methods to control overbreeding non-native species in Australia, the 1950s program that infected wild rabbits with the lethal myxomatosis virus, a project that ended when 40% of the population became resistant. She then moves on to more recent and humane work with engineered sterilization viruses. Such genetically modified viruses, she reminds her listeners, prevent conception by fooling the target's immune system into attacking its own reproductive tissues. And she briefly discusses their dangers. The first is exemplified by the IL-4 modification of the mousepox virus, which unexpectedly killed 100% of the infected laboratory animals. The second is that a virus released in Australia might escape to other ecosystems where the target is part of the native fauna. The latest strategy in Canberra, she says, is to address both dangers by creating a series of related viruses, each of which initially induces a high rate of sterility, but rapidly loses effectiveness in succeeding generations. The first in a family of mouse viruses with the needed characteristics, she says, is being considered for release in the coming year. Anna displays her first image on the wall screen, a table showing test results for the new mouse virus. Looking around, Rob notices the preponderance of white BSF lab coats in the room, and the bellman is already gone, an early exit even by his standards. 2 seats in front of him, Melinda's hair is parted just right of center and tucked behind her ear. The same techniques that created the mouse virus, Anna continues, can be applied to viral agents for primates. And then for the next half hour, she discusses the techniques at a level that Rob, untrained in genetics, can't really follow, but which fortunately is well beyond the statistical understanding he needs to create his computer model. As they descend the canyon road, Melinda turns to look back at the Y-shaped complex. "What's in the other building?" she asks. "Offices in the second one," Rob says. Then in the back, the 2 on the right are level 4 labs, and the 2 on the left are animal facilities. We're so I'm told. "You haven't been in them?" "Not yet." Melinda turns for a final look at the receding complex. "Things are certainly different out here," she says. "Access is restricted to need," Jerry says gruffly over his shoulder. Melinda's eyes open a little wider, and Rob can tell she's about to say more. Before she does, he gestures quickly with his hand and warns her off with a shake of his head. I believe at this time, it's time for Scott to come back in.
I can do that. Thank you very much. That was wonderful, Richard. So I hope everyone got a good taste of the book and what Richard has accomplished here. And I wonder, does anyone have any questions? If you do, well, hopefully it won't become too much of a free-for-all. Just depress your space bar and let's hear what you're wondering.
Dick, hi, it's Michael Nutkevich. Could the setting have been any place but New Mexico? Or is it a specifically kind of New Mexico or even Southwest-ish novel?
Well, it seems like we in New Mexico have, we tend to get involved in big, very dangerous things, starting with the atom bomb. And we have research institutes, you know, here that do some pretty scary things too. So I think it fit in here. Whether it could have been anywhere else, I don't know. But it's very much, I think the New Mexico landscape is a large part of it, a large part of the book.
You know, actually, I just want to apologize to Richard because, or maybe I want to scorn Richard because I can't sleep in the morning because I wake up reading his book. I love this. It's one of those page turners. I can't wait to find out what's happening. It's so relevant. And I'm loving what you're doing, Richard. And I just want to say thank you. This is so important. And again, for those who don't know us, but I've known Richard all the way back to junior high school. So thank you for your beautiful work.
Thank you.
Richard, it's Ed Bodica. My question would be, what is the balance? It seems like you're what I thought was going to be very technical or thriller-ish because of the virus and all those kinds of things in the title. It's very character-driven. I mean, that's probably a thing. I'm not a writer, so it's probably a thing you have to weigh the balance between characters. And is that what it's really about, or is it about the virus or the science or the whatever the thrill side of it is?
Well, both, I hope. I think in what I was after was a story that had some plot-driven momentum, but also the characters having real human problems and real emotions. So in science fiction, they often don't do that second part. And I was hoping to bring more of the literary sensibility of people into it as well.
As a follow-up question to that, it seems like these people, like if you work in that industry, you're going to really relate to these people more. It seemed to me you were really painting a picture of people that are like that. A lot of people that work within these fields are going to say, yeah, I know all those people.
Yeah, well, that's probably true. But as I said, you know, half the book is from the viewpoint of this guy's wife, and she's had a very different history and a very different approach. You know, she's more of a, not exactly countercultural, but she's not logic driven.
Thank you.
Richard, it's Ira. You've said that the book also has mythical and folklore aspects to it. I'm wondering, without giving, since I haven't read the book yet, I don't want you to give too much away, but how did you integrate such a disparate element when you're talking about scientific developments? And you've said you're also does character development. How did you walk that line?
It's kind of a gradual transition from one to the other. I guess in a chapter, the new scientist, the woman with the dark hair, and Rob are having a conversation at one point, and she quotes to him. There's a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, who said, any sufficiently advanced science is indistinguishable from magic. And that's kind of how that other element comes in gradually into the book. But you're right, I can't say too much without giving it away.
Thomas, does that answer your question, or should I pose it to Richard? Well, go ahead, Richard.
I don't know. Can you give us some idea of what folktales or mythology you're drawing from?
Surprisingly enough, after reading them from all over the world, it's the one that we're all familiar with. So, but
I love how you're teasing things and not giving too much away, Richard.
well, you know, it's a difficult balance with this, because I kind of need to let people know that's coming, but I don't want to tell them how it happens.
I think that's good. Do anyone else have anything they want to ask or say?
Dick, it's Jareen. I'm just wondering if you had more than one ending in mind for the book.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. But.
Well, I haven't read the book yet, and I don't want you to give away the ending. But at any time, did you have a clear direction towards that end, or did you consider a different path or a different outcome?
Well, I guess I would just say that when I got to the end, I couldn't figure any other way to end it because of the nature of the situation. Did I consider another one? Not really. It kind of came to where it had to come to, I think.
So this is your brother. I have a follow-up question to that. How much of the novel was plotted out before you actually started writing it, especially with characters and character development, and how much, if any, did things change, especially with characters, as you wrote?
You know, I had a few things, a few experiences that I wanted to put in there. So they got assigned to different characters, sort of. The characters very much develop in the process of writing. It's not as if I had everything figured out ahead of time. I had very little figured out ahead of time, as I was saying, like even what it was going to be. So, and I think that, I don't know, I think probably different people write different ways, but I think that's the case with a lot of novels, that they start out with something pretty vague and only develop as they're written.
Richard.
Hi, Hans.
This is your office mate. I was wondering, given the new virus technologies that are appearing in the news, if you have considered writing a sequel to this novel.
Well, I've thought of that. I can't say that I've embarked on it yet. So.
Well, think about it some more. I can imagine a sequel to it, given what's in the news these days.
Well, perhaps when we're able to get together again, we should do that. You can tell me about it.
Okay.
You're already hungry for more then, huh?
I thought I saw a written question, but it disappeared.
Okay, I see one from David Crawford. How does Lena's story and the virus story fit together, or how did you juxtapose them?
Well, well, in terms of the book, they run the two stories. Well, the two viewpoint characters are married, but their stories are pretty parallel for several chapters. But when they do intersect, so that the two stories are influencing each other. How Lena's story connects to the virus exactly? No, well, there is some. As I said, she had some issues with infertility in her life. So people with that experience probably have a little different attitude towards the idea of a contraceptive virus.
Richard, I have a more general question. You said that you did research, certainly on the scientific aspects. Did you do research, or do you have you taken classes in or have a background in how to write fiction? Or did you learn by doing?
Oh, well, I've written fiction for off and on for most of my adult life. Well, and I've taken a couple of workshops with people. Like I said, Dan O'Brien was here some time ago, and I just took that as a special student at UNM. But it's mostly, I think any kind of writing is mostly learned by doing, not by what anybody tells you. Now, I've seen a couple more questions flash by, but, oh, Bob, the one you asked about what does Embudo mean? It's a Spanish word. The usual translation is funnel, which is kind of what the Research Institute is trying to do with population. It also has a secondary meaning, though, which is trick. And certainly both aspects of it come into play in the book. There's also, and there is in fact, well, Ambuto is the name given to one of the canyons in the Sandia Mountains. So that's the fictional location of this institute. And it's actually, you'll find it around New Mexico because there are a lot of canyons here.
Can you see George's question?
No.
Okay, I'll read it. You've talked about the science and your interest in those issues. I've read the book and I don't want to give stuff away, but there are elements of magic and religion in the story. Can you talk can you talk a little about where your interest and knowledge of alternate realities comes from?
Well, I was pretty surprised actually that I wrote a book that went from science to magic and mythology. But like I said, the nature of this science is it's so much like magic in that it really is just casting a spell on a species to turn this thing loose that changes their ability, the ability to reproduce. And I think that's what, somebody was asking before, about did you know ahead of time or did it develop? That definitely developed. I did not set out to write a book that had magic and mythology in it.
Okay, and Richard asks, who are the science fiction writers that you like?
I don't read that much science fiction anymore. When I was a teenager, I did, but those writers are all ancient now. I should actually bring my friend Steve Altabelli in to answer that question because he's the expert on that.
Well,
tell me, when you were a kid, your guy was H.G. Wells. He was a contemporary of yours.
I'm not that old.
Well, as a follow-up, would you say there are writers who are not science fiction writers who influenced you as you wrote this, or who you had in mind, or who you might have even tried to emulate?
Well, I guess I would say Ursula Le Guin, perhaps, because she used a similar device in at least one of her books, and also she's the rare science fiction writer that also deals with human emotion in a convincing and real way, I think.
Definitely. Okay, last chance. Anybody got anything? Okay. Thank you again. Thank you very much, Richard, and everybody for attending. If you haven't yet bought the Embudo Virus, we'll be sending you a follow-up email with links to buy the book from your local bookseller or online vendors. And remember, if you want to read more about the Embudo Virus, you can go to Richard's website, www.richardheady.com. Anything you want to say now or as we wrap up, Richard?
Thank you very much for everybody that showed up tonight. I appreciate it very much.
And as publisher, I remind you all, buy the book, give it to your friends. It's a wonderful gift. And again, thank you very much for coming out tonight and supporting Richard. Be safe and be well.